The 2024 election has just concluded, and the question that's on everyone's mind is, does anyone actually care about what celebrities think? And speaking of what celebrities think, who would have thought that Russell Brand and the lead singer of the Pussycat Dolls would be praising Jesus? And the new movie from A24, Heretic, is to Christians what God's Not Dead is to atheists. We talk about all this and more on this week's episode of Faith and Pop Culture.
Hey, well, what is up, everyone? Welcome to episode number 37 of the Faith and Pop Culture Podcast. It is me, your host, Daniel, and I am joined at the desk, as I always am, by the chewed-up wad of gum to my bottom of the shoe, Mr. Samuel David Kemp. What is up?
Not too much. I'm just happy that we are past this election, and I don't have to listen to political ads anymore.
I mean, I found those very stimulating.
Yeah, I know.
I get all excited to sit in to have to watch some YouTube video or something. And then the gift that you would get beforehand to see the same ad for the 2000th time.
I know. It doesn't get old. That's the nice thing about political ads is like it's always fresh.
Well, and I feel like it's like an onion. It's like, yes, I've heard this argument made, countless times in the last hour. But like every time you discover something a little deeper, a little different. About
something new
speaks to you.
Yeah.
So like I mentioned last episode, we were recording our episode on Election Day. So we looked into the future and saw that people are happy, people are mad, and people are probably fighting about it. But we didn't actually know like the details. We knew the general plot, now we are living in a post-election world. So we do know the results of the election.
And as it turned out, democracy was both saved and destroyed in the same election.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's a mystical paradox of depending on who.
One will be unraveling for years to come.
So there's definitely obviously the election being the big story, and obviously we are a faith and pop culture podcast, not a faith and politics podcast. Thank goodness. So we don't want to get into the nitty gritty of like the actual election and politics and candidates and all that kind of stuff. But I do think, there are definitely stuff that came out of the whole election process that can be enlightening. And I think you see a lot of kind of the ripple effects down into just wider culture and trends, even like beyond the political arena. So why don't we start with that? Because there's a couple stories that sort of touch on some of that. And kind of the first one I wanted us to kind of break down a little bit, discuss, is just sort of this kind of the question that came up kind of post-election was like, does anyone care about celebrities? Because it seems like there are people that want you to hear the voice of celebrities.
Which they're so important.
Because even, Harrison Ford did it, and that's okay because he's Harrison Ford. But everyone else, you got, like you normally get for these things, like a parade of, these shocking revelations that,
that Taylor Swift threw her weight behind the Harris campaign.
Was there anyone, on the face of this earth that I wasn't sure about how any of the endorsements would go? For both sides, but there is sort of a predictability for it. But it did seem like, especially in the last couple of weeks before the election, it was constant. And just, this celebrity, here's a video, here's them at a concert, here's this person. And very much it just seemed like, the rich and famous have, they've come down from the mountaintop and they've let us know,
how we should vote.
How we should vote. And obviously, if you know the results of the election, it didn't work out that way. And kind of the thing that we can kind of base our conversation on is I came across two kind of interesting and related articles in the Hollywood Reporter. One of them was titled, "All Those A-List Celebs Couldn't Save Harris, but Joe Rogan Helped Trump." And then the other article, which I think was published the same day, was titled, "How Trump Won the First Influencer Election." And it's just an interesting conversation, I think, because it very much kind of raises the question of who has cultural power now to influence people. Is it sort of the old guard of the old mindset of the rich and famous, that people care what the Hollywood actors want to say or the pop stars, or have things shifted and that we're sort of in a new kind of a new terrain? But several things to get into for that. But what are some of your initial thoughts on did you notice some of this play out?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think um, if you've been just sort of in the world at all, I think in the past 10, 5, 10 years, I think most people realize that sort of the old way of media and I think maybe even celebrity endorsements and sort of what celebrities have to say and just this sort of this overall feeling, I think, of like it's actually a little bit cringe when celebrities sort of like issue these edicts from their various homes about how we, the people, should think and feel about something. That I think there's some growing resentment towards that for sure, but also that just the media landscape has. I feel like after this election, I don't think anyone is in doubt that the media landscape has shifted towards sort of this new media landscape of more individual players in both in like news, but also just in media in general, as podcasts have just sort of exploded in popularity. Seems like everybody has a podcast. We're talking about this on a podcast, so the irony is not lost on me. But I think it's just very clear at this point how important those new forms of media are. I mean, they're not that new, but compared to like legacy media, it certainly is. And I think you can't like you ignore that at your peril, as like the Harris campaign discovered.
Yeah, and I think there's a sense of like, go ask someone on the street, especially maybe an older person, like name 10 Hollywood celebrities. That's going to be pretty easy. Ask them to name, 10, TikTok influencers or podcasters. Probably be a bit more challenging. Like,
Yeah.
like there is, I think because sort of the more old school, like just the celebrity, the rich and famous,
Yeah.
they get so much more airtime and like they're more recognizable that we assume that like, well, they're the sort of, they have this many followers on Twitter or something. Like, therefore, they're really the ones, shaping, the opinions of people. And I will say, I do want to address first, and then we'll get into some of that. But like, just the idea of like, is it wrong for them celebrities to speak out? Because you hear that all the time of like,
Yeah.
why would they do that? Like, why, kind of that, stay in their lane. And like, I personally just like, I find, like you said, there's some cringy aspects to it, but like, they're American citizens, and I feel like there are a lot of other people that aren't in politics that are speaking out on issues.
Yeah.
Some of them are like, even on the platform of both parties. Like, I don't think that's wrong. I do think there is a degree of double standards of like, we get annoyed by it, but what we're really annoyed by is not that they're speaking out; it's that they're not speaking out for our stuff. Like, because then when another one does that's more aligned with what we believe or whatever, it's like, oh well, that's great. Glad to have those people standing for truth in Hollywood or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like, well, I thought we didn't like this. Like, I thought we didn't want them speaking out at all. It's like, well, we just don't want them speaking out. So I do think that, hey, whatever. If they want to speak out, they can speak out. But I think it is a very valid question of, like, does anyone listen? And it seems like they don't. And I do think, like, especially if you've been following this pop culture trends and stuff for the last, 10, 15 years, it probably shouldn't be a surprise that, like, celebrities don't actually like have much influence as far as like shifting political policy, or most of the candidates that the big name celebrity Taylor Swift has supported have tended to lose. Like, it's they definitely have cultural influence, but as far as like in more the field of like politics or some of those areas, I think there's almost been like an inverse as far as it goes with like celebrities, that like the more access we've got to them, like through technology, and like the mystique has been lost, that like the less like we might still follow them more and be like we know more of what they do day to day, but I think for the most part we care less about their actual opinions. And you can see that with like award shows. Like, no one watches those anymore. Like, they're all tanking, struggling, because no one wants to hear these celebrities stand on the stage and deliver these lectures to the audience about different social policies or whatever, or even just the idea of like leading men or women in Hollywood. Like, I know people talk about like Tom Cruise is like kind of the last Hollywood leading man. Like, he's about the only guy still going that I'm gonna go to the movie because Tom Cruise is in it and he's the man. Like, like, there's very few actors, and you even see that like, all the guys that were like in Marvel and stuff. Like, you can sell the Marvel movie, or at least you could, but any of them that kind of go solo, and like, that audience doesn't go with them. Like the allegiance is more to like the property, not to the person. You know, like Chris Hemsworth can't seem to make a successful movie unless he's doing Thor, like unless he's doing in, and even like just like anecdotally, I know like I was talking to my wife about a movie about a couple weeks ago when she was asking if I was going to go do a review for the Collision. And I was like, nah, like, there's a bunch of other big movies and stuff, and I just don't think there's enough interest in it. Like, I don't have time. And she's like, are you sure? Like, I've seen it everywhere. Like these, because it had two very young, popular like celebrities. And it's like, you know, they've been doing all the award shows, they've been doing all these interviews, like they've been getting so much airtime because of who they are that the assumption was that people are going to care about this movie, and they didn't because it wasn't an interesting movie. Like people were into like the gossip aspect of it, but I just feel like the more you sort of kind of whatever, like evaluate, kind of see the trends of just celebrity culture, it becomes almost predictable that like, you know, like despite all the headlines and like the, you know, polished videos that they're making to endorse candidates, I don't think they're, if they ever were, like the actual, you know, sources of power or like influence in our culture. And I think that has shifted more towards like the influencer culture or podcasts. And what are some, like, why do you think that is? Like, why has that shift taken place?
Well, I mean, I'm sure there's lots of reasons. I mean, I think one that just comes to mind is I think there's a degree, at least, of perceived authenticity with the more, let's say, influencer class of celebrity. Although many of them may not be like household names, but I think there's just like a degree of intimacy, I think, and kinship with people that are like speaking direct to camera and have at least somewhat of a dialogue with their audience. And I think, and especially if it's over like a long period of time, like you've been following a certain person for years, and like so you develop at least a degree of trust, and at least you know, assuming they're honest, like where they're kind of coming from. So when they do talk about something that's political or what have you, you can at least evaluate that based on what you know about them as a person. And I think that does translate into like a greater degree of trust when it comes to more political things, because there's at least, you know, I'm sure you can fabricate a lot of this, but like there's at least this sense of like I'm getting the real whoever, name your influencer, and when it's just, you know, one-off TikTok videos from Gail Godot or Taylor Swift or whatever saying, you know, you should go vote for this person or that person, then I think like it's just, it doesn't, I don't think, carry the weight, because it's like, well, this is just some celebrity telling me what I need to do, and they haven't really earned the right to kind of have that conversation with you in a sense.
And I think it puts the emphasis on them. Like it,
yeah.
Most of those come across very much of like, this is my duty to sort of showcase that I'm on the right side of history. And
I'm George Clooney and I know best, you know,
very much sort of this is about, you know, me taking this stand, and it's even just the way that they're done is very much like, the emphasis is on like, look at me fighting for the right thing. And I think sort of like, to me, the big difference between like the old school sort of celebrity videos, endorsements, and more the like Joe Rogan type, or, you know, or obviously he's the big guy.
Yeah.
But, you know, the smaller level sort of influencers and stuff. Is this the difference between like talking to and talking with? Like the celebrity endorsements are very much talking to. Like it's, I'm the rich, famous, successful person. I'm looking at the camera, you're looking at me, and I'm going to tell you what you need to do. Where like a podcast or like an influencer, like most of that comes out through, even if it's not a conversation with you directly, it's a conversation between people.
Right.
It's longer form. There's a back and forth. Like there's a dialogue to it. There's a greater sense of like, this is a conversation we're having. You're invited into this, and we can kind of work through this. And I think like, the more you know, I mean, I think that appeals to everyone.
Yeah.
But like the more you know about, you know, like even just Gen Z, like that culture, you can see why that would speak their language more than just sort of some distant person wagging a finger at them and telling them what they need to do, or they're a bad person. Like that more like personality driven, dialogue driven, you know, like personal connection, even if it is somewhat artificial in a digital world. Like this, you can see why that speaks the language way more. And I feel like it's only going to keep slanting that way. Like I don't think it's going to, you know, suddenly slant back to like, well, you know, but what do the celebrities say? Like, I think
Yeah.
this is sort of the future. And I think even this.
Well, I think that that train is going to leave the station, and I don't think it's going to be coming back. As far as like us going back to, I want to know what those, far off celebrities think of how I should vote. Like, I don't think anybody's going back to that.
Yeah, which is not to say that they don't have influence, and like Taylor Swift, like in the entertainment industry. Like,
Yeah,
she
well,
has a lot of sway.
Right, and I think that's the interesting thing. It's like there are people who have massive followings that can mobilize them to do certain things, but I think like that doesn't always translate into you can now, come follow me as we all get behind this political candidate. That I think is way harder and way more complex than just like, hey, let's all cheer on whoever the Kansas City Chiefs, or you know what I mean? Like it's way less consequential, I think, for one, but it's just much harder to translate like, hey, you all loved me in this movie, now let's go vote for your future. It's like, well, that's a bigger ask than just like, hey, let's all go to the movies and, watch this movie, or let's all buy this toy, or whatever it may be that they're sort of advocating for. I think when it moves into the political realm, I think it's just there's a much higher bar that people, I think, automatically have or just intuitively have when it's, some celebrity telling them.
Yeah, and I do think there'll be sort of a reckoning for just like an evaluation after the fact, trying to figure out like, within Hollywood and just like Christians and stuff, like who has the power. And I think as Christians, it should direct us, change our view a little bit as far as like, maybe don't get so worked up that this pop star made the most predictable political endorsement in the history of the world. And and assume that that's really, well, if she said it, then Gen Z is gone because they're going to vote for whatever, or believe, or this, support this, as opposed to going deeper to sort of more, what seems to be the growing and already the more influential of like, conversations and podcasts. Kind of another adjacently political story that I wanted us to touch on because it's been kind of going viral. A bunch of conversation headlines and stuff, and people just because we didn't have quite enough to get mad at with all the election going on. Sometimes we just need more stories.
It helps if you just fabricate some outrage to just sprinkle on top of your already boiling anger. Yeah,
sort of like, hey, if you can't find enough legitimate stuff, then hey, just get mad at whatever. Just make it up. Live in a fantasy. So this is an interesting one for several reasons. But Nicole Swartzinger, who is I think she's on like Broadway right now. She is like I think the lead singer of the Pussycat Dolls. I know one of your favorite bands back in the 90s, kind of pop girl group.
Girl power.
So she got herself in some hot water. Not for her music or anything like that, but she had the audacity to comment on a Instagram post or social media post that comedian turned spiritual guru turned like Christian evangelist. I don't know what all he is right now. Russell Brand, the former kind of raunchy comedian, had posted a picture. I think he was at like a Trump rally or some political thing, and he had sort of like it looked like a kind of MAGA like red hat.
Yeah.
But it said like make Jesus first again instead of make America great again. And he was, picture that, and Swartzinger, she liked that, and she let it be known. So she commented saying, where do I get that hat? 3 exclamation marks and a question mark. So she really wanted that hat.
She needs that hat.
I hope she found it somewhere. Although not everyone wanted her to find that hat. Because people quickly made an issue with that she is clearly getting into some political hot water, and that she's, they were appalled that she would be, supporting, not that hat, but other red hats, of political stuff, to the point that she, as tends to be the news cycle for these things, came out with an apology. So she, in her own Instagram, I'll just read a couple of it. It says, I deeply apologize for the hurt caused by my recent engagement with some social media posts. When I commented on these posts, I made the mistake of not realizing that they could be easily interpreted as being politically related, and I apologize to anyone who understandably reached that conclusion. Like so many others, in times of adversity and uncertainty, I turned to my faith. I believed that the posts I engaged with were about encouraging people to choose love and faith, putting Jesus first. For me, Christ embodies peace, compassion, hope, and above all, unconditional love. And she ends, says, I come from a place of love. I will always support the values that bring us closer together. It's so important that we come together with compassion, and I love one another more now than ever. So crisis averted, because we got that apology out there.
Dodged a bullet on that one.
And it's just, I mean, in so many ways, this is just so dumb. I do get a kick out of like if you were to take a time machine back like 15 years and tell someone that like one day the internet's going to be in an uproar about the singer of the Pussycat Dolls, like, you know, agreeing with that raunchy, comedian Russell Brand about a Jesus hat. I think that would,
in the positive. Like,
I think that would blow some minds.
Definitely would.
In the context of the guy from The Apprentice winning the second election, woo! That will be crazy. But so I get a kick out of that. But beyond the joy I get from just that idea, like, to me, my takeaway with this is like, are we still doing this? Like,
yeah,
is this still a thing that like just sort of that outrage, not for the thing itself, but like, well, I know it's not this, but like, it could be. But what if it was this instead? That would be bad, and we're mad at that. And it's like, but it's not that thing. Like, it's, I don't know. Is this as stupid as I think it is?
Yeah, it's probably more stupid than you think it is, in my opinion. Because on so many levels, it's like, first of all, like, it's fascinating, I think, because it's like a lesson in like the many layers of communication. You know, like it's all the nonverbal communication that's happened, and all of the assumptions that have taken place to lead to something like this. Because on the one hand, it's like it's just a hat that says "Make Jesus First Again." On the other hand, it's very clearly a callback to "Make America Great Again" hats, which red hats are now synonymous with Donald Trump. And so it's like the person who made that hat is obviously making that connection, although not explicitly, because it doesn't say "Make America Great Again." It says make Jesus First Again. And then for you to comment on that, maybe naively, and so there's just like this funny thing that happens where like you can comment on the thing that it actually says, but like, did you not know like the sort of the political implications of like that style of hat? And then also, like, are people really upset that she, wants Jesus to be first again? Or is it just that like everyone's upset about the implied thing of the hat being like, oh, well, it's clearly sort of a, a wink, wink, not nudge, nudge about, hey, I'm wearing this hat, but really deep down I'm, politically red, and, I want the Republicans to take over the White House. So it's just, and then to go and apologize for like a perceived offense. It's like, well, it's not her fault that people get offended at a thing that could be something, but isn't. And it's like, I don't know, it's so dumb to me.
Yeah. And like, obviously I think a lot of this is, I mean, we've been doing it for a while, but like, is this fueled by a bunch of people disappointed with the election and emotional heights, and they're just finding a place to direct that ire, and they chose this. There is, I will say, and like I don't have strong opinions on this at all. Like, I don't.
Other than it's dumb.
Other than it's not, like, there is a degree of that I just personally don't like, sort of the bleeding of, even if it's like sort of a political iconography of this hat and like a Jesus message, and like, I don't know, to me, and that's just like my own personal bent, is like, I'd rather keep those, like, make it a blue hat, or maybe not a blue hat, make it a green hat, make it a non-political
a pink hat.
Because I think there are Christians that had that being a blue hat, or like if there was an equivalent, would be mad that like, oh, you're trying to equate, your political party with Jesus being first, and you're blending. Like,
I could see. Do you remember those those shirts of Obama, where it was like hope? Oh, but it was like in that sort of I forget what the style of it was, but it's like,
that would be the perfect equivalent.
But you put like a portrait of Jesus on that, and that would be sort of the blue team's equivalent, maybe. Yeah,
because that's sort of, I do think there would be a double standard with that. Of like, then it's not just a hat or just a shirt, because it's connected. So there is a degree of like, I don't know, like I don't, the hat isn't for me. That aside, though, like, Yeah, like it's just, can we not agree on like, and it's funny, even like The View, like the TV show was, who like they've never seen a small thing that couldn't become a giant controversy, like we're like, come on guys, like it's a hat, it's Jesus, like this isn't a big deal. Like, I feel like if you can't even get The View riled up about something silly, then it's probably not a natural, valid, a big deal. The other part that just gets me with this is just sort of the question, like, are we still doing the silly controversies for nothing? And like part two is like, are we still doing the silly apologies for those silly controversies? Like
that are nothing.
Like,
yeah.
Again, I haven't been in a place like she has been. I'm not some famous former singer of the Pussycat Dolls or anything. But who knows? Like maybe we would. But I feel like the way this should have played out is just, she's wanted the hat. People commented, "Oh, are you trying to endorse this candidate?" And she should have just been like, "No, I'm a Catholic. I want Jesus first," and that's what I was saying.
End of story.
Yeah, and then if people are still mad, then that's on them.
That's on.
Like, if they can't, well, I actually know your heart better, and you were, then you just ignore it. You just move on, and no one cares. But I feel like doing these sort of apologies of like just empowers that kind of thinking. Of like, I'm so sorry that I like
that I could not have possibly thought out all the various ways
and
that
you took
other
it
people
wrong,
could
and
have
that the way you took it wrong was hurtful for you. Like, must be on me for not thinking about all the millions of people that would see that post. Like,
which it reminds me too of just, we talked about the Wicked movie poster like a few weeks ago, and that whole it's sort of one of those same. I think it's very much in the same vein of this, of like kind of a dumb thing to be upset about, people taking it the wrong way, like clearly missing the intention. And the guy who made the sort of fan art of it was just like, you know what, I'm going to leave this fan art up because that's what it is. It's fan art, and I wasn't trying to be like racist about it or something. And that's on people who take it that way. And so I think that is maybe more the takeaway for in this case, like, one, it's a stupid thing to begin with, and two, like, maybe we don't need to apologize for how other people interpret the way you do something. Like, if you're being super ambiguous and whatever, like maybe you can clarify your stance and then move on. And just like the thing with the Wicked poster, like nobody's talking about that anymore. So it's like people move on. And I think the more you sort of...
Yeah, it's a circle. Like you keep feeding the fire to try and put out the fire, and then it makes it a bigger fire.
Right.
Where it would, if you just walked away and I went outside, it would dwindle down to nothing. This is sort of the takeaway from that. Kind of another thing I wanted to mention, just briefly, is that, which isn't connected to politics, but it is maybe connected to putting Jesus first or not putting Jesus first. And that was, I just saw, I was a couple of days late on it, but I caught up on the horror movie from A24 that I came out last weekend, a couple of days ago, Heretic, which was it was an interesting movie. I'm not a big horror guy. But like the premise, if you're not familiar, is two like Mormon missionary ladies go to like a visitation on their mission, and it turns out that Hugh Grant's in the house, and he's a big creep, and he's gonna lock them in the house, and not necessarily just try and like physically torment them, but he's gonna like theologically torment them, and it sets the sort of up like where the horror is that he is challenging their religious beliefs, and it's sort of this. I mean, in some ways, it reminded me almost of that like Freud's Last Session movie I reviewed last year. Of like that was fiction of C.S. Lewis and Sigmund Freud, and like they sort of have this religious debate, and that's kind of the type of movie this thing is trying to set up. And like the characters are like Mormon missionaries, but it's very clearly like they're applying that beyond just Mormons. Like it's just faith. Like, I mean, they do more talk about just like the Bible and stuff than they do like the Book of Mormon, and so sort of this wider thing. And I wanted to mention it for two reasons. Because one, speaking of just sort of like trends and stuff, I just think it's interesting. Like in my review for the Heretic movie, I start off by saying like, don't look now, but like Hollywood might be in its religion era. Because like there's been a bunch. Like obviously the faith-based stuff is like you're getting like two or three of those a month. Like
that's exploded.
It's like we just had the best Christmas pageant ever. Like Bonhoeffer comes out later this month. Like there's a Mary movie on Netflix. I have faith-based stuff I've been sent, and I just can't get to it because I've had so many of these like big movies. And then like beyond that, like you have Conclave, which is another recent movie, sort of about like the Catholic Church and picking a new pope, and this is like drama. Good movie. Check out my review for that. But it's interesting. Like there's this seems like, and I haven't done enough of a deep dive to sort of figure out, to like, get some deeper implications or like insights into that. But just like the eyeball test is like the idea that Hollywood just sort of doesn't deal with religion is not true anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely been a shift. I think probably led by the more like Catholic variation on Christianity, because there are so many, I think, Catholics in sort of the mainstream Hollywood. And so I think, like, for whatever reason, it does seem interesting that there are way more movies now that are at least okay with dealing with some religious things that aren't necessarily always negative, although I think probably the bulk of them would be. But I think I don't know, I think that's always kind of been a theme in Hollywood. Usually it's in a way more negative aspect towards religion. But I think, I don't know, there does seem to be kind of a cooling off towards just the maybe vicious hatred towards anything religious.
And I mean, you get like guys like Martin Scorsese, he's making a Jesus movie. He's made some, like, as a Catholic, made some.
Yeah.
Like, and in some ways, I do think that it's always been a bit of a myth that like Hollywood just, it's just very atheistic, and there's no room for religious stories, like faith stories, like, because there are. I think maybe just not quite the variety of like the more churchy kind of very Sunday school type movies weren't always around, so we assume that they weren't making. But like more challenging and nuanced, and like ambiguous type things have always been around. So I do think it's interesting that for all the talk of Hollywood and how godless and stuff, like there's never been more religious stories. I mean, mostly because the church is Christians are making so many. We have these whole studios and stuff just cranking these movies out. Like, but there's never been more. Like, you could go to a faith-based movie like at least one or two a month, like all year. Which is crazy. But the other thing I wanted to mention with that movie, because it does, although it is dealing with like religious questions, it does have a very like kind of skeptical bite to it. And I don't know if that was intentional. Like, I think they sort of wanted it to be this like stimulating dialogue. It's just like they only give sort of the atheistic perspective, all these monologues. Then like the religious people just sort of stare bewildered, camera close up, and they'll say things like, "Oh, I know that's just not right, but I'm not smart enough to explain why." And like sort of
because they were scared, clearly, because they got a creep.
Yeah, I mean, like not necessarily thinking quick on your feet when you got Hugh Grant trying to lock you in his dungeon. But sort of like as I was watching that movie, again, check out my whole review, so I'll get into it in more detail. But the thought that kept coming to my mind is like, this movie is God's Not Dead for atheists. Like, this movie is doing all the same things that sort of drive me crazy, and I think drive non-Christians crazy about those types of movies. It's just it's just flipping the script. Like the God's Not Dead movies, you have the heroic, virtuous Christian that's just gonna like steamroll these dumb atheists, and they're bumbling, and like they're just tossing out these like very simplistic Christian arguments or rhetoric, and like it's just like a knockout blow for the atheists, and like they don't know how to even respond to that, and like and they're just walking off with their head down, and the Christians win again, and all the Christians in the theater cheer, and like sort of that idea. Like, as a Christian, it's like, yeah, like we won, our side, and this. If it wasn't sort of a difficult movie and a horror movie that people aren't really into, I feel like this would be a movie I just would want Christians to watch. At least those that are like making Christian movies. Yeah. To sort of say like, this is sort of how it probably feels. Like, we think it's so inspiring, and these non-believers are going to be, oh, like, well, if that Christian just completely obliterated my worldview, with those simple answers, like, then maybe I should change my worldview, like, because it's so compelling. Yeah. This sort of shows like the other side of like, no, like, it's not convincing, and it's actually just frustrating because like, this in the movie, like Hugh Grant would be throwing out lobbing these simplistic like, arguments that are they're so bewildered, and like as someone that has like actually studied some of that, like it's like, no, like even atheists don't use that argument anymore, like because it's so discredited, like it's so built on faulty premises, and like those aren't like they're a good question, like the problem of evil, like there are things they could have done in the movie. Yeah, that's like that Christians need to deal with that because that's difficult. Like but the movie just doesn't really do that. Like it more goes for the low hanging fruit of like these like old conspiracy theories, and it was equivalent to me of like the Da Vinci Code. Like there's so much rage about that, and like, but like it's just built on a bunch of stuff that no serious people actually put any weight into that. Like it's only convincing to those that like are just completely ignorant of religion and the Gospels and that whole process. And
well, I think that's good. I mean, I think it's good for, if Christians are okay with seeing a horror film. Like, I think that is a really maybe educational movie for people to watch, to say, okay, like if you're a huge fan of like God's Not Dead or these types of films, watch this one, which is the inverse of that. How do you feel? And that's how people feel sometimes when they watch like God's Not Dead. And maybe there's a middle ground there where you can make compelling faith movies that aren't just a total like one side steamroller with sort of simplistic answers and questions and stuff. And so, yeah.
Yeah, it just exposes that the power isn't in this very clever presentation.
Yeah.
The power is just that we agree with it and we find that powerful.
Yeah.
And you sort of see when you don't agree with it why, actually a very one-sided presentation isn't very compelling to people.
Yeah.
If they don't agree with it. But speaking of movies that you can go see, such as Heretic, the next segment of this podcast episode we have out now and coming soon. So as far as out now, we've already mentioned them. Like Heretic just came out. Check out my review because I had thoughts on that. I think there's some interesting stuff with it, even if it's maybe not one that a lot of Christians necessarily are going to like rushing out to theater to go see. But I mean, A24 does good work. So like I think there's some interesting stuff with it if you do check it out. And then Conclave 2, I was late to the party on that one, but finally checked it out. So that's not like recently out, but my review for that is recently out. And you don't want to miss that.
No, I've already watched it 4 times.
Yeah. So go check out that. Something that you maybe could miss out on as far as coming soon.
Have you seen this one yet?
I have, unfortunately.
Okay.
So really the only movie.
It looks so dumb.
Like the only movie is like a very slow week for movies this coming week. We have Red One, which is the like big spectacle Christmas movie. Old Saint Nick gets kidnapped by some Christmas witch, and then Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and Captain America have to go bust him out and do a lot of spectacle and humor, and like it's just so dumb. So
it's like a superhero version of a Christmas movie.
Yeah, I guess
basically
it's like a Christmas movie without all the stuff we like about Christmas movies, without the Christmas warmth. And it's an interesting. I use that word loosely. Interesting, like. I think it's unique, because most Christmas movies you either have like
the trailer looked pretty unique.
Like you either have like the very like kid friendly, the whole family we watch Muppet Christmas Carol, or else you have like Santa Slasher 4, like the very like R-rated gritty sort of fringe
like Die Hard.
Yeah, like the Die Hard movies. Where this is a PG-13 movie. It's not necessary. It seems like it's trying to aim at sort of that middle ground of like, it's not like entirely inappropriate, but it's probably like, I didn't take my 9-year-old kids, and I'm glad I didn't take them.
Because wasn't there wasn't there one with the guy from Stranger Things?
Oh yeah,
and it was like a gritty, like,
he was like Santa, but he just like beat up a bunch of bad guys.
Yeah, it was like, I forget what that was.
You get that, and like, I don't know, maybe there is a lane, like an untapped audience for
maybe.
But part of me was also thinking who is that? Like, are there many people that want to go see a Christmas movie with like fighting snowmen and weird stuff, like and elves that are like on a SWAT team, and like, Santa's getting kidnapped, like, but also want it to be a bit more edgy and like want some profanity in it and like some more like sexuality and like, I don't know, like I don't know. I'm curious to see how this movie does. I think it cost like $1 gazillion, so it's going to be a big bust regardless.
Yeah. But you know what is costing a lot of money and will not be a big bust is Mission Impossible 8, which I saw the trailer for that, and I know it's like this is not coming soon, but it's coming like I think May, somewhere of next year. But we'll have to do an episode on this later. But I think there is something to the fact that like those Mission Impossible, that franchise has had such a long life, and like I think quite successful, and like I'm excited to see another installment in that. Whereas I'm not as excited about other long-lived franchises.
Oh yeah, I know. The trailer rocked, and I haven't seen the trailer yet.
Yeah.
I just know it rocked.
Yeah.
Because it has Tom Cruise in it. Yeah, those movies are great. I mean, it helps when your lead actor is like Edward Cullen, and he doesn't.
He
change.
doesn't. Yeah, he doesn't age. Yeah.
So there are a Hollywood, at least in its small pockets, can still deliver. But speaking of things that always deliver, maybe because of its handsome lead, is the next final segment of this podcast. We have things we like that you should like too. So as you probably could guess from that lead in about being a handsome lead, it is in fact my week to share something that I like that you should definitely like too. And I will admit, many of the things I try and sell you on this show, I know might be a hard sell. Like I know maybe Scandinavian Viking metal isn't for everyone for some reason. It's still, not quite as mainstream as it should be. But this week, I thought I would have something that I think all of us, especially as we enter the not quite yet Christmas season, but soon Christmas season, and sort of that mindset we can all agree on. And the thing that I like that you should like too is people who are good at their jobs and enjoy them. And this stood out to me. Yeah, can I get an amen for that? And the reason that I've been thinking about this is that this last week, wild. Can't get into all the details, but our car while my wife was driving, it literally fell apart. The wheel, the entire wheel part, not just the wheel, the whole tire just fell off our car while we were driving. Crazy situation. A whole bunch of stuff kind of happened with that, which meant that we needed to get a tow truck because it turns out you can't drive on just three wheels.
Yeah.
So we needed to get a tow truck. We ended up waiting, and coming to our rescue was Ants Towing. I mean, they got a logo. I think Anthony is the guy. A logo of is some jacked up big ant, and they can lift their weight. And I mean, this guy was awesome. If you need towing in the Georgia, Atlanta area, call up Ants Towing. So he comes and it's 9:00 at night. We were at a church building on Wednesday night, and he comes and he just the guy loves towing. He started telling us a story. He's third generation tow truck driver. And he was sort of doing this weird thing and with the truck, and aren't you gonna pick it from the front? And he's like, no, just watch. I got to go in the back, and I'm gonna back in and slide underneath it, and because I do that, the tire will turn, and he's just giving us the whole and then he delivered. He did it perfectly. The guy, this is watching Da Vinci paint. This guy is the Da Vinci of tow trucks. And as you see so many people that just don't like what they're doing, or they're just not competent at it, and to find someone and people want most people want to think of towing as some glamorous thing, but the guy loves what he does, and the guy does it well, and I felt inspired by that. That we all need to be a bit more like Ant.
That is inspiring, and I think it's always just exciting when you find somebody who's passionate about what they do, and they're good at it too. And I think we can all try and find those people, and perhaps be those people as well.
Yeah, and I can't necessarily be good at what I do, but I can be passionate.
Yeah,
I can.
And you are, Daniel. You are.
I can enjoy it. But one thing that we're happy that you are good at doing is joining us every week for this podcast. We encourage you guys to check out. It's going to be a bit of an unusual schedule for the next couple of weeks for the podcast.
Yep.
Thanksgiving we're going to be off because we're just going to be so stuffed with turkey.
Oh yeah.
That we just give ourselves a little break to digest.
Pumpkin pie.
But next week we actually will have a guest on the show. Interesting guy that's doing teaching film in high school. It's a guy that I've got to know over the last couple months. So excited to have him on. Maybe add some intelligent insight into this podcast.
Hopefully.
For us to change a pace.
Yeah. Finally, we'll have some intelligence on the show.
But we will let you guys be the judge. We hope you will join us next Thursday, every Thursday, for more conversations on faith and pop culture.